People who can't code will basically always be at the mercy of the people who can. And people who can engineer and orchestrate systems of AI agents or system AI workflows, whatever it seems to be the popular name for it now, will just always be able to do more than the single model call that you are stuck with in ChatGPT, if that's all you get to do.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Ocel, VP of Innovation at This.Labs, here for another episode of the Leadership Exchange. And today I'm very excited to be joined by Shawn Wang. You might know him as Swyx online, the editor of Latent Space and the co-founder of the AI Engineers Summit. Shawn, how are you doing today?
Really good. Thanks for having me on, and good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for being on. We've known each other a lot. We've spoken to each other on many different episodes of the podcast over the years, and I'm always excited for our conversations because we always love to really dig into things. I think for people that may not be familiar with you, you have been on an amazing journey into and throughout tech over the years, and most recently really been kind of diving deep into the AI space. And I know I've asked you this before, but I haven't asked it to you in this front. Maybe to get us started, what was it that you first saw in the sort of the AI space that really attracted you to it and made you just want to dive deeply into it?
There's two stages to this. The first stage was just attracting to the AI space in general, and then the second stage was starting everything that I have started. And so the first stage was really looking at the progress in specifically generative models, and actually this happens before the current wave in LLMs. Because you could see since the GANs were invented that things like this person does not exist, and you can see those images kind of slowly coming into focus over the years. There's a famous chart out there that has this is the state of the art in image generation from year to year to year to year, and you can see that. Growing until what we have today, which is absolutely absurd. I didn't think at the start of this year we would have anything like what we have in 4.0 image gen now, and now it's slow. We complain about it's slow, it's not exactly, it's getting too many refusals, that kind of stuff. But a year ago this was not possible, and a year before that that was not possible, and all that. So I did take a master's in machine learning course, and while sort of working, and sort of I actually did my first implementation of an NLP project when I was still a trader, back in my option trading days, because a lot of prices in option deals actually happen in Bloomberg chat. And so what I was doing was I built a parser for Bloomberg chat and turned it into structured data and priced billions of dollars of options based on that. That obviously got me interested. I think the inciting incident that caused me to start things like the rise of the AI engineer and the AI engineer summits and pivot Latent Space into just doing AI engineering stuff was closer to just after ChatGPT. We were doing this little hackathon, and someone came out to me and said they're all in on AI. I want to be a prompt engineer, but I can't code. What do I do? And I realized pretty much then and there that people who can't code will basically always be at the mercy of the people who can. And people who can engineer and orchestrate systems of AI agents or system AI workflows, whatever it seems to be the popular name for it now, will just always be able to do more than the single model call that you are stuck with in ChatGPT, if that's all you get to do. So then I realized that basically I've seen this kind of playbook before. Specifically, I think you and I have been through the front end wave where front end development used to be a thing you do on the side for software engineering, and then it became a whole discipline with its own career ladder, and own terminology, own universe of tools that you're expected to know. I've seen this professionalization wave emerge a few times, not just in front end. So in data engineering, which emerged as a discipline, out of data engineering, you see analytics engineering, which is its own thing, DevOps as its own thing, and all of which have their kings and their little debates and battles and stuff. But I think very meaningful for the people who choose to specialize in those things. You could consider them just generally software engineers, but when they choose to specialize, they get much better at it, of course. and there's also a lot of like startup money going in. There's also a lot of interest in like best practices, and it's really rewarding to build that out when the field is just emerging. And for me, like I think I was just basically first to see that there would be specialists in LLM engineering, and LLM is too many syllables to say, so it just shortens to AI engineering.
Very nice. Yeah, one thing that's interesting is I know in the past you've also had your eye on low and no code tooling, and what strikes me as this is I think there's a through line here because a lot of the conversations that I've been having around AI, I with you am so impressed at the explosion of capability. I think you and I last talked on a podcast about a year ago when Devon still was in a beta mode, which is like one of the first sort of agentic, it's one of the first code agent tools that was out, and now agent-based coding has blossomed significantly since then. So things are changing so much. I mean, all of us now are just Studio Ghibli characters running in our own real-world simulation these days, right? You were talking about the 4.0 image generation. My son has way too much fun playing with that. But beyond capabilities, like one of the things that I feel like has been the fertile soil that has really driven the adoption of these tools and the idea that people are very excited about integrating them is not just their capabilities, but also the promise of efficiency. I think that sometimes gets overprescribed as the removal or elimination of software engineers. But one of the things that is clear is that software has become and is extremely expensive. Developing tools and platforms extremely expensive. So tools like agent-based coding, like AI, seem to have the promise of making more customized software more efficient and more affordable to more people. And that I feel like is sort of hiding not just in the engineering side of it, but probably all over business. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Like, is this a significant driver for why people are, or why it's not just hype, but why it's also sort of actually being adopted widely in the industry and many industries?
There's a slight disconnect between what you say and where that situation is. So basically, what you're trying to say is, what part is just hype and what part is kind of real, and is that real part the low code software coding agent builder things? And
I don't want to discount the parts that aren't that, but I guess what I'm asking is more along the lines of is sort of efficiency sort of a fertile soil that has kind of really locked this in. Like this is, some things are,
yeah,
feature rich, but it's also this other idea in the background that it promises to make many parts of business faster, more efficient, more capable, is sort of the thing that gives it even more legs.
yeah. I slightly disagree that the effect
Okay.
is so strong. And I love not being the hype man. Even obviously, I do traffic in some hype. I think that so, for example, like and I don't like the word efficiency so much as productivity, but like two sides of the same coin. But basically, I think that productivity has been much better for the coding tooling, like specifically for software engineers, and then the low code side has not seen as much uptake. So you see people like Notion, like Zapier, maybe Superhuman, all trying to make really big AI splashes. And to my knowledge, not a lot of people are really using a ton of those features. And then also you would see like the people who in the no code space who actually capture attention are newcomers. Like Airtable did not capture that, Retool did not capture that. It's the new guys like the Bolts, the Lovables, the V0s that have created that sort of low code space, and maybe it's to some extent Manus and I think Devin as well. So I think like it's very interesting. Like I think there's a lot of just churn and froth there. People are doing things, but it's mostly 0 to 1 greenfield things that are prototypes or ephemeral apps is what they call it, like throwaway things that would not have been built because you would have to ask a software engineer to do it. Now they're getting done. That's great. But I think like the productivity gains are going to be from like the at scale large systems that the cursors of the world, maybe like the factory AIs of the world the co-pilots of the world even. Those are being focused on there, right? So at the margins, I think there's a lot of like 0 to 1 non-technical people can now create apps. That's great. But they're not. But the business is not really going to rely on those things in a measurably impactful way for a good while. So that would be my tempered response to what you just said.
Well, I definitely don't see, and I hope that business leaders are sort of this year moving, this year and going forward, I guess, beyond the hype. I mean, what I've been interested to see is the amount of sort of peer-reviewed studies and papers that are starting to come out showing the effects of both AI tooling, so not just for engineering purposes, but I've been seeing a bunch in the healthcare space with people applying AI tooling for things like not just for diagnoses, which is the bleeding edge and still probably in the development and hype space, but even for practical things like scheduling. I was seeing some really promising things coming out of the hospital systems. I think it was in Cleveland, where using AI tooling that helped people reschedule their appointments, like dropped no-shows by 40%, which is just tremendous savings on a very sort of boring tool, a very practical, boring tool. And I think that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited. Again, it's not like this idea that non-coders or like founders are suddenly going to be able to create the next Amazon just from nothing by just putting a prompt into V0, but this idea that we're starting to see staff level engineers saying, I went through the trouble of learning how to use these tools, of how to set up rules files so I'm more efficient, so that it works with me and I don't struggle as much against it, and I'm seeing significant productivity gains. I think it's those kind of like real practical things. I agree with you that's the stuff that I've been excited to see, is the first sets of staff engineers and senior engineers that are actually have reached proficiency with some of these tools, who are then saying, there's nothing I'd love more than to tell you this doesn't work, but it does. And it's been working for me. So whether you believe it or not, I'm going to keep using it because I found out it actually works a lot for me.
Yeah, I think the smaller tools will work before the bigger tools. I guess that's kind of self-evident. I like encouraging those things because you have an immediate benefit. And in some sense, like the lower AI, like scheduling is like not a huge AI case, but like, you start to, it starts to not matter whether or not they are AI tooling or not. They are tools, they have a job to do. And sometimes they might use AI. And I think like that's the ultimate end state of where these things all are. As much as I am tied to the success or growth of the field of AI engineering, we don't want to be sort of gatekeepy about it, in a sense that you don't need to get a certificate or something to qualify as an AI engineer. You can use AI no matter what your role really is, as long as it sort of suits your purpose. I think what we're trying to do is just improve the state of.
Cool. I'm curious if you draw a distinction between the things that you're excited about in the near term, especially if you are running an organization, right? Like not a services organization, but if you're just out there with any sort of enterprise in the environment. Are you more excited about sort of the productivity, in other words, the ways that your workforce will use AI to do their work? Or are you more excited about the ways that you'll be able to integrate AI for your customers' benefit in your products? Is it equally, or does it just depend on the company? Like how should a company sort of assess where they should put their innovation, I suppose?
Yeah. So I call it, maybe let's call this internal versus external facing AI innovation, right? Mm-hmm. I would say definitely the smaller the company, the more outward facing things tend to be, just because they try to differentiate themselves with their customers, right? Like, so if you're a small startup, then you're trying to be an AI startup these days, whereas the larger enterprises tend to be more conservative with their customers. Although the more bold people may reap disproportionate rewards just because everyone else is being conservative. I think and the internal tools tend to be more amenable to breaking, and so like that's a safe way to experiment with AI and build up internal capabilities. So I think that's a good split. I think the problem, I guess, is that at some point you have to show ROI, and it's very hard to measure internal worker productivity anyway. And so if you want to attribute the ROI of your AI investment to improvements in productivity. Well, you had trouble measuring productivity in the first place. So what are you going to do? And all your people are going to say they love it just because they love working with AI, right? So it's hard to have any sort of internal metrics beyond
Yeah.
it just gets you into the normal leadership debates of what is productivity.
Well, right, and that's funny. I mean, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but that has been at the same time that we're having this conversation, the return to office conversation continues to rage on. And like one of the biggest observations I have is that the arguments, the definitive arguments going out about whether it's better or worse for people to work remotely together, etc., is being driven often by managers who didn't have a good sense of how to measure productivity other than that you were at the office for 40 hours and they could observe that fact.
Yeah, that's
And
terrible.
that's I feel like that probably is just exacerbated by AI. You're right, which is to say that if you don't have a good way of knowing how what your people are doing, what their velocity is, and things like that, it's going to be difficult to measure this. Unless you're a very mature organization that has spent a lot of time in this area.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, like I have had people on my podcast where we talk about this stuff, and I actually asked them point blank, like in an upcoming episode with Anthropic, I asked them how they measure productivity, and it's very software engineering focused. It's the DORA metrics, basically, like MTTR and all those kinds of things that engineering leaders would be well familiar with, and it's comforting to see that, like, yeah, even they struggle. And they're that's all they got. And I think the only thing that's new for them that they highlighted was there's an increase in number of projects that would not have been done that are now getting done because it's a Slack message away. Because they've set that up, right? Like I have a bot that's connected to my repo that has all the coding context, and you can Slack to it, and it's going to create a PR. And so all you have to do is, once the CI is done, review the branch that has been built, and if it's good enough, close enough, then you've actually saved a bunch of time, because in the meeting itself you typed out your requests, and by the time you go back to your desk, you're done.
Yeah, that's another interesting topic, and I'm curious where you are on it, which is that I think, for people that have been in the industry for a long time, might remember when sort of waterfall was the way software was built. You spent all your time getting all your requirements ready, then you did all your development, you did all your testing, and then you released. And then, Agile had its sort of transcendent period, which we're probably still in, sort of iterative-based design, this idea that, hey, if you can catch issues, defects at every stage of the process much earlier and correct them, it's cheaper. And it just occurs to me that, like, AI is one of these sort of disruptive technologies for engineering that we have not yet fully understood what software development lifecycles will be like with AI. Have you begun to think about that at all? Because, like, one of the things that occurs to me is that if any amount of these numbers that are coming out of some of the earliest studies that I've seen for productivity gains are true, it just seems like we could have development lifecycles, just for example, like you were saying, yeah, more prototyping, but also you could run like an A/B of entire products potentially with the amount of advancements that you're getting. So, like, I'm curious, like, what if you've begun to think about what software development life cycles might look like as we start to really realize some of these gains from AI?
I have two answers for you. One is the Hamel Hussein backed eval-centric view of the world. And this one you can find in the Brain Trust episode of our podcast. So this is the eval-centric view of the world, where you are typically stubbing out some LLM product, and then you start to need to do evals in order to have the loop of improving that product, right? And so that is part of the software development lifecycle that merges in with what ML engineers are used to doing for developing models, except that now you're developing AI products. I think the other thing that I would highlight was we actually had Sierra, which is one of the leading customer service AI startups. Their founder is Brett Taylor, who happens to be chairman of OpenAI. They've started to come up with this concept of the agent development lifecycle, and this is what works for them, which is a loop of development, testing, release, quality assurance, and alignments. And you can see their blog posts on that. I think all those philosophies I just needed to mention because those, if you ask any other sort of AI thought leaders, they will point you to things like this. Now, how does that link to waterfall versus agile? I don't know. There's always this debate of like where in that pendulum are we at. I think that there should be things that are more considered that actually are more waterfally. And then for many other smaller things, you can be more agile. So it doesn't help you to force every new feature or new project or modification of a project through the same process without consideration as to how good AI is at doing it. So I think for the chunkier things, go ahead and be more thoughtful. It's very easy to get stuck in a loop when building with AI, sort of vibe coding with AI, or trying to bake in some assumptions that you then regret and you have to unwind. We have another talk about this from Ramp, actually. So in the AI Engineer channel, you can look for the bitter lesson on agents talk. That's not the actual title, but just look for the Ramp talk, where basically they've been through a few cycles already where they built something and orchestrated a bunch of LLMs with code, and then the next model came along and they just threw the old thing away because they didn't think about how the models scale up. And that's really what the bitter lesson is. Like you sort of have to just build systems that grow stronger with models rather than get replaced the moment the next model comes along. And so like thinking about a model capability in that sense and building for it, ahead of it maybe, is definitely a part of it. But anyway, so waterfall core, agile fringe, maybe that would be a good way to end this side of the discussion. Just because like sometimes you need to get an intuition of what is possible and rapidly iteratable and what is not with AI. And I think that just comes with a little bit of experience.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, that's again, I think one of the lessons that certainly we've learned in our engagement with AI is that it's seldom you can seldom see before you've started using it where AI will be useful. It's a lot more that its usefulness unveils itself sort of as you've used it, in the sense of like, you suddenly start realizing like, oh, I wasn't going to do this because it wasn't going to be a good use of my time, or it would have taken me too long, or I'm not sure how best to pursue it. And then somebody just happens to ask, well, what if we used AI for it? And sometimes that bears tremendous results. And again, it just seems to me that like one of the big conversations that's happening in the development space is in people assessing the quality of the code that's coming out of AI agents, which is fair. I think that needs to be done. But some people have used paradigms such as maintainability as one of the ways to evaluate code that comes out of AIs. And it strikes me that like that quality may not actually be the quality that people think it is or care that it is. Because like I thought about it, like what is code maintainability actually, right? It's that ability to go back and make edits to existing code in an efficient enough way, in a cheap enough way that it's worth doing, right? Because once something becomes too prohibitively expensive to do, then you just don't do it. So maintainability is an idea to bring the price of code edits down. Well, maybe maintainability doesn't matter as much or at least the definition of it changes, if it isn't what would help humans maintain something, but what will help agents maintain something. Like if agents can tear the code down from a previous model and rebuild it equivalently, let's say, in a fraction of the time, suddenly maintainability doesn't mean much. And that was kind of where I was going a long time ago with that idea that things kind of tie back to money a lot, because there might be new ways of evaluating the quality of code that's coming out of agents that sort of get at what maintainability was always doing, which is just how efficiently, what is the price per line of code that a certain code state is in that enables future development. I don't know. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, that price per line of code has definitely gone down, but also there's a lot of slop that gets generated that may not be the most secure code in the world. And all
You're
that
muted.
stuff.
Sorry.
Oh. Hello.
Are you back?
Hello.
It doesn't say you're muted, but I don't hear you.
Hello. Okay, I'm back now.
It's not blippy, so it's not that.
Am I back?
There you go. Okay, you're back. You're back.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Luke. I'm tethering, so. Okay. Yeah, so that price of per line of code has definitely gone down. Like just yesterday, I vibe coded like a 800 line of code script that did a little data pipeline that I wanted, and I don't know what's in most of it, but I type in the input and it gets the output that I want. That's all I care about. So that's fantastic. But I have a pushback again. I think any engineering leaders that hear what you just said may have some warning bells. I really like this quote, which I don't know where it comes from, but basically you want to code you don't want your code to be at the level of your smartest coder, because then when the bugs happen, only your smartest coder can debug it. Your code actually needs to be at like very simple, dumb enough code, because then when the bugs happen, you need to sort of up your intelligence. So it is very alarming when only your agents understand your code base, because then when you get into trouble, then your humans are screwed. So I actually care a lot about readability of code still. I think that I am very cautious of this keen interest of developer tooling vendors to build a whole new world called agent experience, including my former boss at Netlify, where they're like, oh yeah, humans don't need this, agents have different needs, and I'm like, yeah, well, it's better if we can do both. Obviously, I think everyone agrees with that, and like it's actually, you're not sacrificing that much. If the agents need a little bit of scaffolding or crutches to get where they need to go, and the humans don't, or vice versa, then like we can, that's a cost we can eat, because that collaboration of human and agents is still much better than human alone or agent alone, and we got to preserve that.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I certainly don't want to see code suddenly become some sort of machine code gibberlink equivalent going around. I think humans.
A lot of the researchers.
I think readability is.
Yeah, the researchers want that to happen. The researchers want that to happen. They're like, if we're doing this right.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Then it will be gibberish, because they will have transcended to a place that is above us.
That's interesting. Yeah, and also a little terrifying to think about in the morning here. But I think readability. I agree with you. I think readability still needs to be a thing, but I think maintainability or extendability starts to become a thing that maybe is a little bit softer of a term. Right? There are ways that humans should write code because they understand that there are ways that it might modify or extend in the future that will make it easier to make those changes or not. And I guess it's just how much agents can do in a smaller window of time maybe leads to a situation where code can be more readable but less traditionally maintainable or extendable, because it can buy into the existing pattern, and if a different pattern shows up as being necessary, it can then completely buy into the new pattern. Maybe that's hype, maybe that's confusion, but these are the types of things that I've been kind of keeping an eye on. And I kind of turn my eye when people just sort of say, well, the code that came out of it was gross, I would never have accepted it in a code review. And the grossness can sometimes just be because it doesn't have like those nice patterns that people would normally do when humans are doing it in order to make code maintainable well into the future and not need that sort of every 2-year rewrite thing that's sort of plagued the industry for forever. And I just like that idea that I'm keeping an eye when people say that code isn't readable. I would agree with you. That's something that piques my interest, is saying, hey, what can we do to make agent-based code more readable, more easily understandable, especially because it produces it so fast. We have to be able to review it just as quickly for it to be effective. But maintainability, extendability, the sort of cleanliness of patterns, these are the things that I'm curious if we don't change what we consider those things to be once we learn that we're not the only ones working in the code. I guess that's ultimately where I'm sort of keeping my eye on as far as the feedback that people are giving to these tools.
Yeah. Well, cursor rules can prevent a lot of that. I actually enforce it much better than humans can. So I do think developing a core set of code styles like now is even more important than it used to be, because now it'll just be read every time by the coding agents that are building your stuff. It actually is beautiful. Like I tell it to comment every function that I make, or and log extensively, and like checkpoint inputs and outputs, and it just does it all the time. Because those lines of code don't matter to the AI, whereas for humans it's always a chore to do all that stuff, including generating unit tests and running them, which I never do.
Yeah, no,
it
it's
just
crazy.
Automatically does it. It's just fantastic.
I'm telling you, I I have had teams of engineers that I could not get to write formal design documentation and architecture documentation for anything. And all of a sudden they're using agent-based tools, and within like a week they spend how much time before they start just spending time with the agent writing documentation so they both understand what they want to do. It has increased the quality of code. Even if the agent never writes a line of code, just the documentation that's coming out of it is value added to the team, and training best practices. So it's like we even if the AI never writes a line of code that gets shipped, just what it's enabling in the existing software development processes has been something that's been a positive ROI for the teams that I've been on. And again, if people are more diligent with what they're doing, more mature processes, yeah, that particular ROI will be down. But for less mature teams or smaller teams or more junior teams, I think those types of things are sort of under tapped and as far as people aren't paying enough attention to the ways that they can help train up a team. I think sometimes people are worried that AI will stunt junior engineers, but I think some of the ways that the agents are working and make people think and to make them most effective, it's almost produced the types of behaviors I would want juniors to get through normal mentoring that they're not always getting at their companies.
Yeah. I think in some ways it sort of elevates everyone from, worrying at the sort of individual line of code level to higher abstractions, which is really good. In some sense, it also makes the leadership problem a lot more acute, because now you actually have to guide people who are guiding things instead of guiding people who are directly responsible for every line of code. That's a fun shift. Some people will be good at it and some will be terrible, and they will actively fight you, and they probably should be somewhere else in your org.
Yeah, there you go. Well, we're getting pretty close to the end of our time here, and I think on the way out, one of the things that I have, always found fascinating and enjoyed about speaking with you and following you online is just the way that you think, your curiosity, your hunger, your way of cataloging the things that you learn, and not just about AI, but about many parts of life and many parts of technology. What kind of advice do you have to leaders? Not necessarily to clone what you have, but to be better able to both keep on top of, yes, this AI sort of trend and the developments because it is so quick, but just to be more hungry learners and consumers and observers of the world in general.
Yeah, that's a fun one. I think the problem with this is that I am definitely more full-time on it than other people, right? So they cannot just simply do what I do, just because they just don't have the time for it. But like the core advice is something that I've been saying for I think like 10 years now, which is learning in public, in the sense that whatever it is you're interested in, write up your notes about it and post about it, not to become a thought leader on it, although that might happen. It's more just that, one, the act of writing your notes for public consumption actually just forces you to distill down what you really think, and then two, you get the outside chance if someone reads it and disagrees with you or agrees with you, you get some feedback, and the positive or negative feedback is actually much more helpful to your updates because it's personalized to you, and may also directly pull in the employees or employers or whatever, collaborators, partners, teachers that you might need for the thing that you're exactly working on. So like, there's no better way to get personalized advice than to just learn in public. Then the other thing I think that has been, I've been trying to offer a lot more of is just the Feynman question. I don't know if you know about the sort of Feynman myth, but basically, people were asking like why Richard Feynman was so effective, and they're like, he really doesn't actually have that broad of a span. He just has this stacked ranks list at all times of the top 12 questions that are most important to answer. And anything that matches those 12 questions, he goes very deep on. Anything that doesn't is not important. Right? So either your list is wrong or you should be focusing on those 12 questions. And there's like basically nothing else. And so I try to keep at the top of my head what are the top questions that I'm pursuing for the AI engineering field, and I try to answer them in my conference and in my podcast, and people tend to come along for the ride. One of the ways in which I just want to point people, because I've had several versions of this conversation. One of the ways that I try to encourage people is to build their own mental frameworks, even though you can import from others. But if you have one that sort of clicks your brain and answers every single thing that you normally want to have, and basically draws a map of the world, then you can be a lot more effective navigating that world rather than being reactive. And I think going from the reactive to the proactive is another form of leadership, right? That's what I try to encourage with all of my leadership track people in my conferences. And one way to do that, to build a mental framework, is the sort of MECE categorization. I don't know if that's come up before in your podcast. MECE is MECE, mutually exclusive, commonly exhaustive. So what that really means is that commonly exhaustive means make sure you've accounted for everything, and then mutually exclusive is make sure you've sort of bucketed things in ways that make sense, that don't overlap so much that they are vaguely defined, like they have clear boundaries between them. Therefore, they are systems that you can improve, right? Once you have a MECE categorization, you basically have adopted a systems thinking approach to what are the inputs to a thing, what's the outputs from a thing, how does that connect to this other thing, what am I rate limited by, what is progressing at what rate, what is the baseline of the other thing. So that is all a part of the canon of systems thinking, which a lot of other people other than me have written about, but that's the starting point, that you have a map of the territory before you go navigating that territory.
I love that. And I love that idea of the mental model. I think that's so true. I think if you don't put yourself out there, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be in front of everybody, but if you don't put down somewhere what you expect to happen and why, you learn such different lessons. And I think sometimes the wrong lessons, because all you're doing is sort of making a model that explains the past, but you're not refining your model that's attempting to look forward. And so, it's very easy to fit a model to everything that's happened before, but there is absolutely no guarantees that it's productive when you turn it around and face it towards the future. So I like that idea of, having a mental model and kind of forcing you to reconcile with your own sort of perceptions of why things should be happening and have to adjust it based on new inputs.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, listen, we've reached the end of our time. We're going to put in the show notes some of the links in the things that you've discussed. But is there any place that you want people to either find you online or connect with you, or that you want to bring their attention to based on the topics that we've talked about today?
Yeah, there's just like so much that I cannot cover that is better coming from others. So, we have 2 playlists that I think I dropped in the show notes for the AI leadership tracks for the 2023 and 2024 conferences. And then I'm doing another one in June. So if you want to go to all of that, you just go to ai.engineer. It's the domain that we bought. And we have a leadership track. It's basically an entire leadership conference that is organized alongside of the engineering track. And one of the most effective things I did last year was I was like, we had these sort of bring your team group ticket thing where it was like one leader for engineers, and you just kind of rolled up together and you went to different conferences, and then you came back and shared your notes. It was really fun. A lot of people like that.
Wonderful. Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thanks so much, Shawn, for being our guest, and thanks to each of you for listening. Hope to see you all next time. As we said, there'll be a lot of links in the show notes for where you can find Shawn online. Most places you can find him as Swyx, that's SWYX, and kind of follow the links from there. But as we close out, we'd just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This dot is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at thisdot.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. Thanks, everybody. See y'all next time.
See ya.